Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Once again, thank you all for joining as usual. As we go on, if you have any questions, you want to make a comment, please feel free to raise your hand or send a note and the team will pick that up. Sir, the euphoria of a transition is now all over in Nigeria, and we now have a new president. Do you want to give us an overview of what your thoughts are on how things have evolved and some of the immediate steps that the new president has taken?
Well, if I were to classify the transition, I think I would call it the conspiracy transition or the demarketing transition. A friend of mine from the United States, an old classmate, so you can imagine how old he is, called me after the inauguration and said, he said he couldn't understand Nigerians, that we're among the brightest and the best that he's really ever come across. And he wasn't just referring to me alone, but referring to the Nigerians that he had come across during his period at the United Nations and several specialized agencies of the United Nations. So you guys are so bright. But why do you go around demarketing your country? That frankly, most people were expecting a total breakdown of law and order in Nigeria, given the noise they were hearing all over the. And that was even why it took Biden so long to appoint a delegation, because they did not want to be caught napping, so to speak. And if you actually look at it, this was a transition of conspiracy. People said there will be no party primaries. It won't take place. Party primaries took place. Party primaries will be disorganized. Nobody will emerge as candidates. Candidates emerged. There was no violence. There was no disorganization. Then they moved on to say, actually, there will be no elections. I've been at several meetings where people were prepared to share with me names of so-called members of the interim government. And not once, not twice, people will ask me, have they been in touch with you? And I will say, no, they haven't been in touch with me. Look, the list is being compiled. There was no interim national government. Then they said there will be no elections. They do not. Elections took place. Even 3 days before the inauguration, there was still this conspiracy floating around that the government was going to declare a public holiday on Friday so that the Supreme Court will not give its judgment. An amount of money were being bandied around the social media by which the Supreme Court justices had been bribed and so on. There was no public holiday. The Supreme Court met, delivered this judgment, and even the Supreme Court, normally judges are supposed to be immune to what's happening outside their courts. But the Supreme Court had to say that all this amounted to attempts to blackmail judges of the Supreme Court by all these figures that were alarmists that have been bandied around. And finally, Inauguration Day came. There were people who had sworn that the streets of Abuja will flow with blood. There'll be fire and brimstones on that day. There was no blood, no fire and brimstones. The inauguration took place. Soldiers marched, cultural stroke dance. There were inaugural address, and that was it. So this is not really the first time that I will go through this, but it's the worst of times in terms of our tendency to demarket Nigeria, see conspiracy under every chair, under every table. And yet we get on with it. We put our best steps forward. Okay, maybe not the best steps, but it's not any. When again you look at what happened, Trump and Biden, how many cases also went to court? Until we were even starting to say, will there be inauguration in the United States? But they never went this far. And I think that we should grow up. We should wisen up. We should stop allowing our fantasies to demarket Nigeria, creating facts where there were no facts and fantasies. And so really, that's my takeaway from not just the inauguration, but the whole transition. I know this has been a peculiar transition because at least since we came back to civilian rule in 1999, there have been contentious elections. There's no election where people haven't gone to court, except the Jonathan one. But I don't think there's been one with such vitriolic sentiment surrounding it, and people threatening to bring down heavens and hell if the two can coexist upon the heads of Nigerians and upon the head of Nigeria. But we've got through it, and here we are, 3 days, 4 days after the inauguration. I have also listened to a lot of the commentaries on the subsidy brouhaha, and I've laughed. I cannot remember a time since 1999 when there have not been queues at the petrol stations when there have not been hoarding of petrol stations, when there have not been price hikes, even under Buhari, this past 1 year before the inauguration, there were three petrol, petrol hikes, petrol queues, petrol shortages, and so on. And yet, I've heard, how can Tinubu visit this upon our heads as if this would be the first time it will happen? I'm not saying that the subsidy issue was very well handled. Until actually yesterday, we were really not sure was subsidy off or on. It was an ad lib in the statement. Presidents don't ad lib in their addresses because those addresses carry consequences. So one is not making an excuse for that ad lib. But to say we've never had it so bad, this has never been on our head, is again part of the demarketing. We will get over it as we get over everything else in this country. But it's irritating when we go around demarketing our own country.
But so when we look at the United States not too long ago and the whole January 6th insurrection that happened there, we look at Turkey, we look at some of the other countries that are going through elections. The same sort of things have been happening. No one ever dreamt of the day we would see the kind of things we saw in the US when the elections happened. Is that a factor of the populace waking up and wanting to fight for their rights more than just Nigerians trying to demarket Nigeria? Because what happened in the US, we had never seen that before.
No, I mean, you are partly right, but I think it has to do with the way our societies have become so divided, irrespective of where you go to. Take the election that had just happened in Turkey. I listened to the reports by the different observer groups. In fact, I think there are about 49 observer groups. I'm not saying 49 observers, observer groups, 49. And they were all so negative in their reports about the elections in Turkey, that it was not a level playing field, that there was an absence of democratic expression of views pre-election, and that although on the day of the election, there was no doubt that there was a level playing field, but that the counting of votes that followed did not reflect transparency and what have you. And yet, the winning president had, I think, 52%, while the losing opposition had, I think, 48% of that kind of thing. Now, I regard that as a hotly contested election. The kind of election that I regard as being an insult to our intelligence is where the winning party wins 98%. And you, of course, you know the countries that, you know, I am referring to. But when you have, you know, 48, 40, I mean, 52, 48, that to me reflects by and large a level playing field when it comes to I don't think we should be expecting elections in which saints are conducting the elections and saints are running. Even in the case of the United States, 70-something million on each side, even though Biden had a gap of 5 million votes, but the Trump still had how many? 71 or thereabouts million votes. Now that's a heavy voting on both sides. So, but it shows, it reflects cleavages within the societies. Cleavages within the societies. Yes, it is true that the figures that came up in our own, as a result of our own election did not show a massive embrace of anybody. In fact, we are just lucky that in our own constitution, there is no requirement that you must have 50% plus one to be declared a winner. I think those who wrote that constitution feel that asking for 25% in little touch of the state is enough qualified victory and not to add anything to it. The same in the United States, they feel that asking the electoral college to determine who wins is sufficient rather than asking for the winner to have the 50 plus 1%, or in the United Kingdom, for that matter, nobody, I mean, that I know since I've been monitoring elections in the United Kingdom, had even up to 40% of the votes, and especially when you have a multi-party system rather than a two-party system, you know, electoral votes tend to be scattered all around. But we have to just admit that we have deep features in our societies, and it is how we are going to get our societies back to that middle where you live, I mean, where there will be extremist right and extremist left, but the moderate people will be in the middle. That's what we should start to work towards. Don't ask me how we are gonna get there or work our way back to that. I really don't know. But that's where we should try to head, rather than allow the extremist left and the extremist right to capture our political parties.
Before we leave the point on Nigeria, I want to ask two questions in relation to the speech. A lot of people have said that it represents hope. It represents something to look forward to in the future. But at the same time, some have said we've had this kind of statement before. So that's the first thing. What's your thought on the initial speech that was made? And then the second one is regarding the section where he talked about foreign policy. because that section seemed to address Africa and want to look at some of the challenges and represented concern for some of the issues that are going around not too far from Nigeria. Would like to hear your views on those 2 points, sir.
It's probably not fair to ask me to judge an inaugural address, because I always, my yardstick had always been how close is this to John F. Kennedy's inaugural address. It shows my age. Younger ones on this platform will probably have inaugural addresses from people who are closer to their age. I like that resounding call to virtues, to sacrifice, not extreme nationalism, but an inaugural address that shows you can be faithful to your country while being faithful to the world. Whereas what you tend to get to know these days don't measure up to that standard. So let me leave that as it is. On the foreign policy issue, I see a repeat of Nigeria is Africa is the centerpiece of our foreign policy. They never went beyond that. Since Balewa said that in 1960, of course, there had been, if you like, a fragmentation of Africa into sub-regional groups, ECOWAS, then the AU itself. And I wish it had gone. I wish it had gone a bit beyond that. I know there was that bit about cooperating with other people, other leaders, towards addressing the issues that confront the global scene. I would have liked a bit more on that, especially given the fact that BRICS is meeting, the foreign minister of BRICS are meeting in South Africa today. They started their meeting today, and the summit will come forward in August, I believe. Well, Nigeria is not a member of BRICS. You know, there's this thing that actually bothers me. When all the commentaries that I have heard have spoken categorically about Argentina, about Saudi Arabia, about Egypt, about even Turkey being applicants. And, at times they mention Nigeria, at times they don't. That, like the issue of subsidy, are we in as applicant or are we out, showing no interest? I really can't tell you categorically. I have checked, and there are people on this platform who, please, I want them to help us in clearing the air. Are we an applicant or are we not? Because I have spoken to some of the people on this platform who were in the system, whom I felt should know, and some have said, oh yes, we've been applicants since 2015, and some who have said, no, I don't think we're applicants. I remember talking to President Goodluck Jonathan in 2014, and we discussed this issue of BRICS. Like most Nigerians, he felt offended that that we were not a member. I've forgotten whether he said we were not invited to join or, but the thing was that we were not a member, and he felt offended. And he said, we are not going to apply to join any group that doesn't want us. We will go and form our own. And I said, Excellency, we better be careful, because who will join our own if we don't join one that's already established? And in any case, whose fault if we were not invited and we left it at that? But then there are people who told me that since 2015, we had been an applicant. So given that, there's no way for a country like Nigeria, there's no way where your foreign policy goals are going to terminate on the boundaries of Africa. We've grown beyond that, much, much beyond
that. So you talked about the BRICS event in South Africa there. One point that dominated the summit so far is whether or not President Putin would be at the event in August, the main summit in August. And some of the pictures we're seeing shows the Russian foreign minister there, and these conversations have been going on. Now, clearly, from the comments from the South African foreign minister, she's indicated that they are looking for a way to make it happen. They are looking at the laws. What are the ramifications? What are the legal loopholes potentially that they could use to get President Putin into South Africa for the summit? Is South Africa taking this too far?
Putin's issue is probably going to lead to a refinement of the obligation of members of ICC when issues relate to countries that are not members of ICC. You could say the way I have put that, I have implied that the issue is not clear-cut right now. There are people who have argued that under international law, South Africa has an obligation to enforce the warrant of the ICC. And there are those who said, well, there's a lacuna there. It's not really too clear-cut, because the United States, Russia are not members of the ICC. They've never signed up to the Rome Treaty, which gave birth to the ICC, and that therefore really, to what extent could the ICC then start issuing warrants of arrest against non-members? And then there's a political aspect also to it. That is, there are no double standards here. Is there no double standards? This week, Kissinger celebrated 100 years, and he was lauded by the American press. Not all of them. A few of them raised issues, raised questions. But you know, whatever America says, the rest of the world tends to parrot. He was, acclaimed as the master strategist. Yeah, I mean, Yazama was involved in the Christmas carpet bombing of 24 hours of North Vietnam, carpet bombing of Cambodia, overthrow of democratic governments in Latin America, and yet he ended up with the Nobel Peace Prize. And then for the same offense, or some will even say for offenses that don't come close to that, you are issuing a warrant of arrest against it. That therefore, there's a question of double standards, and that needs to be clarified. I think really the problem for South Africa may not even lie in international law, but in the fact that South African domestic law has domesticated the ICC charter, and that therefore any court actually in South Africa can find the South African government guilty of unconstitutional behavior if footage shows up and they don't arrest him. They may, of course, need to come up with the doctrine of necessity. I mean, they are not going to arrest, the head of a global power, a nuclear power for that matter. So it's a quandary for South Africa. It faced the same conundrum over the former president of Sudan, who then had to be smuggled out back to Sudan, and the issue then had to be cleverly buried. So of course, the way out is for Putin to attend the summit by Zoom, virtually. So that way, recognizing that South Africa is a friend of Russia and not willing to put South Africa into the bad books of the international community, Putin may simply decide, I will attend, by Zoom, rather than attend there personally.
There's a comment here, sir, that the Russian foreign minister made at the event. He's accused Western powers of using sanctions against his and other countries. But he used a phrase here. He said, as an instrument of colonialism and to unfairly suppress rivals in the global power struggle. Do you see the sanctions in the same light in which he has used the word instruments, or the phrase instruments of colonialism?
I mean, the foreign minister of Russia is a very clever man, and the cleverness of policymakers come in your use of words that will resonate with people you are trying to attract to your side. Anything that you say is an instrument of colonialism is bound to resonate with Africans, with Asians, and so on. This is not a clean issue. One also may say that yes, but on the other hand, we Africans don't like big powers invading the territory of smaller powers. We've always taken the position that this is not acceptable to us because in Africa, we have big states, we have small states, and we don't like big states, enforcing their bigness on small states. And so to that extent, we look askance at invasion by big states against smaller states. But the moment you then say that, people then start to talk about the historicity of parties involved in a dispute and what have you. So, lawyers will often say that bad cases make bad law. The Russian-Ukrainian war is a bad case that one should really back off from drawing fundamental conclusions from. It's simply that bad. There is no side of the wall in which your case falls that you don't end up still smelling awful.
One last question on this, and then I'll move to the United States. But that is the fact that you touched on this briefly earlier, is why I'm raising it. Venezuela, Argentina, Algeria, UAE. These are some of the countries that have expressed interest in BRICS. And you've pushed the thought around this South Atlantic Treaty Organization. Is that what BRICS appears to be turning out to now? An organization that can assert itself against the major power brokers that we have in the world. And if you have some of these other countries that I've mentioned joining BRICS, is that your dream that's coming to pass there?
No, not at all. No organization that includes Russia, China, even India, would you regard as an organization that is providing building blocks against the superpowers of the world? So to that extent, no. The South Atlantic Treaty Organization cannot possibly be made up, cannot possibly include Russia and China and India for that matter. India is on the Indian Ocean side. In a way, you see, this we are facing. I'm sorry if I'm going to sound like a revolving door, just going round and round and round. But these are the attempts that are going on at creating the building blocks of a new world order. Because even as we are talking now, as BRICS is as the foreign minister of BRICS, and are meeting now in South Africa, in South America, there is a meeting going on of what they call the Atlantic South Americans, and the Pacific South Americans. Lula da Silva, president of Brazil, during his first coming, had actually succeeded in getting getting South American countries to agree to the I think it's called USAN, Union of South American Nations. After he left power, his successor was not interested in it, and it kind of it went dormant. Now, starting yesterday, Lula succeeded in getting, I believe it's all leaders of South American nations to meet. And they have to be leaders of South American, not leaders of American. So the United States cannot show up. Canada cannot show up. It has to be from Mexico all the way down, including Venezuela. First time that people of different ideological tendencies will meet. So and that's almost like a bridge between the Atlantic and the Pacific. How would that fit in with BRICS, for example? Or how would that fit in with the South Atlantic Treaty Organization that, I am interested in? Or what is happening in Europe? Today, the meeting of the European political community, which again excludes the United States. This is Macron's dream, meeting in Moldova. So these are all attempts at these building blocks, how they will all gel in a new world order. We don't know, because this is the beginning. It's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the beginning. It's just the beginning. And some are not, and are probably going to be incompatible. Some will be compatible, but then this is where statecraft comes in, as people then shave the rough edges of things to meet. I mean, if NATO can be talking about Japan and Australia as friends of NATO, where people are probably going to be talking about friends of BRICS. In fact, I think that there are some members who are not, if NATO is going to be talking about Japan and Australia as friends of NATO, there are people who are going to be talking about friends of BRICS who actually may be in South Africa at the meeting.
Thank you, sir. Let me now go to the United States, and I'd like to get your views on the news that we're hearing that former Vice President Pence, may be coming out later on this week, stroke next week, to also run for the high office with someone who was also an advisor to President Trump before becoming a critic to the president at the time. To what extent do you think former Vice President Pence running against former President Trump would impact the chances of re-election for President Trump?
Mr. Moderator, do you really think we should be getting headaches at this stage of who is going to run and who will not run next year at American election? I think there are about 10 people already who have thrown their hat into the ring. If we are going to spend our time discussing that, I assure you, every week, we will be discussing American election. I think we should just wait until they finish their primaries. Then we have something to sink our teeth in, something substantial. But really right now, on the Democratic side, you have the John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy III, who also says he will run on the Democratic side. I mean, I don't really think that, right, that this is, at this stage, we should leave the American electoral process alone.
Yes, sir. Let me go to a question someone is asking, sir. This person wants to know about your thoughts on the shifting of the war, Russia-Ukrainian war, to locations in Russia, and some of the attacks recently that targeted Moscow. They want to know what your thoughts are on that. And I will add one more question to that, because we're now starting to hear that potentially local groups are now talking about the possibility of a revolution similar to some that we had seen before. What's your view on that, sir?
I've always said on this platform that my biggest fear is this war spinning out of control. That as long as it was Russia versus NATO, behind the scene, they always have an understanding of how far. In fact, somebody on another platform got in touch with me and said that he understands. I've been asking for the rationale behind NATO publicly announcing which weapons it was giving Ukraine, and that his own reading of the matter, that this was a signal to Russia that this is how far we are going, not any further. Therefore, you don't need to overreact. And I've said on this program that it is somebody misreading the signals, or somebody who is not part of the understanding, who then does something that sparks off a wider conflagration. Now we have Russia, the territory of Russia, being attacked by drones. And I mean, I can understand the element of provocation, because I've said this so many, that Kiev is being destroyed, and that there doesn't seem to be any reply except to defend yourself. Well, at times making facilities available to somebody who can also weaken your enemy is an element of defense. Are we going to believe? Whom are we going to believe? Let's put it that way. Is it the Russians who insist that it is Ukraine that is behind these attacks on Russian territory, that the drones are sent by Ukraine, and that Ukraine has had nothing yet, that they ain't seen nothing yet? Or do we believe Ukraine that says they are not, listen to the word, directly involved? In other words, Ukraine may be saying, we are not the one doing this, but we know the people who are doing it, and we are not going to stop them. We know who they are. And I mean, Putin has a lot of domestic enemies, and not all of them are farmers. Some of them are also people who have been trained in the armed forces of Russia and who have retired and who now think this is an opportunity for them to seek to destabilize Putin. What will be Putin's reaction? This is my fear. This is my fear, that Putin is not then, it doesn't go to that say where Putin will say, all right, I get it. We'll wind up the war. No, I think Putin is absolutely accurate that he still has more arsenal in his, in his military, more military hardware in his arsenal to hit Ukraine. He's never really attacked the palace, the presidential palace of Ukraine. And yet, now I think a lot of people believe now that Ukraine was behind the drone that went over the Kremlin. Can you imagine? No, not that. Can you imagine? 9/11, bringing down the World Trade Center, led to the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, even though Iraq had nothing to do with it. So you can imagine if any country attacks the White House will level that country. There will be nothing like moderation. They will level that country. So what are you expecting Putin also to do if this weapon, if this what have you, are coming from Ukraine? I'm worried because I've been pointing to the danger of a war that spins out of control. I'm really worried.
In the time that we've got left, I want to deal with one question, sir, and hopefully you can help us on this one. And this is in light of the elections that have just concluded in Turkey, and President Erdogan being appointed for a third term. And at the same time, the president of Central African Republic is calling a referendum on the 30th of July to look at extending the term and removing the two-term limit of 4 years each from the constitution in their country. Does having a leader for as long as these leaders are trying to well, in Turkey's case, it's done and dusted, but does that length of time help to drive development, or does it actually hinder progress in those countries?
Well, as far as the Central African Republic is concerned, my reaction is they never learn. They simply never learn. Because some of the coups that have taken place, whether it is in Guinea or Mali or there's another country in the Sahel, is precisely because they tried to amend their constitutional to remove term limits. and the military then came in to actually also overthrow them. And that's part of what, in fact, part of the criticism that has been made of ECOWAS and African Union, that you should regard whether it's constitution that is amended or whatever it is, you should regard attempts to remove term limits as attempted coup d'etats that you should take steps against. And civilians should not be allowed to carry out coups. What the president of the Central African Republic is trying to do is to carry out a civilian coup. The constitution says 2 terms. He's doing a second term, let him finish and get out of there, and let another president come. Whether term limit is compatible with development is that wider issue of democracy and development, which we discussed on this platform, I think, several months ago. And I would even like us to have maybe a town hall on that, because I just don't believe that when you are dealing with the global south, that 8 years maximum are enough for you to plant the seeds of development, nurture them, get them to grow to the stage where they cannot be reversed. I mean, if you're an investor who wants to bring in his money for industrialization, you will know that 8 years are simply not enough for you to go from bringing in doing the feasibility study, bringing in the machinery, start production, and overcome that what you call that syndrome now, where the import of goods. For you to have the import substitution mechanism, you need more than 8 years. And yet by 8 years, the man, whoever it is, who is in charge is ready to go, and a new man comes in and starts reversing policies and putting in his own. And that's really what leads to abandoned properties and abandoned development industries all over the place. Nigeria is a good example of this. Go around the states. As soon as one governor goes and another one comes, he abandons, even when that project has been completed, because he wants to, he wants to develop his own schemes, and he doesn't think that building on the schemes that he has inherited is development. He wants one where his own names will be on it, in terms of either launching, placards and whatever have you. So, and I think this is the quandary. This is the conundrum that we face between whether democracy is compatible with development. But definitely, it amounts to a civilian coup. Having, constitutional amendments to remove term limitations. It amounts to a civilian coup.
Thank you very much for that, sir. We've run out of time tonight, but thank you for your insights on the various topics that we have dealt with. We'll be back again, same time next week. and want to thank everyone for joining us here. Good night, sir.
Good night. Wakanda.